Yeah, if you came here to learn organics, you got questions, now's the time to talk to make your trip worthwhile.
I'd like for you guys to discuss a little bit what you think the role of the drones are in the hive. It doesn't have a whole lot to do with a lot of things we practice, but we've been observing and really curious.
Well, the obvious one is the drones are there to fertilize the queen. Further than that, I haven't observed much, although I did read an article that talked about, they found drones regularly above the brood, which I've seen as well. I've seen that my drones tend to congregate in the hive above the brood. What are they doing above the brood?
They're putting themselves as a defense mechanism, so when pests come in, they go to them first.
So there's sacrificial bees. Yeah.
And in that same idea, Dee's talked a lot about how the pseudo-drone theory, how when we enlarge the workers, the varroas go after the workers more. I've done counts where I went through a frame, not a frame, but some comb that I had cut out of a hive and actually counted the number of mites that I found in the individual cells between the worker cells and the drone cells. And I don't remember the precise numbers, but my worker infestation rate was like 14%, or 4%, I mean. And my drone infestation rate was more like 50%. So when I have a hive that the workers are doing fine, and the drones are the one taking the damage from the varroa, that hive is fine. We've got plenty of drones, and the workers who are the ones who really need to be there to do the work are not taking the damage. So you can have a hive that has a pretty heavy mite load and still be successful.
Yeah, but then you get it to where they can go into the worker brood, and you got enough juvenile growth hormone to mimic the drone side with the hormones and things, and then all of a sudden you got problems with all your worker brood, which is what most people have because they're on the bigger combs.
Well, and you know, if you listen to what is frequently taught, which I think is part of where you're coming from with your question, is you want to have the information, the ammunition to say that drones are worth something more than just worthless, right? People vilify them. People say, if you got drone comb, get rid of it, you know, or don't allow them to make any drone comb in your hive. And that just, to me, it's not natural, and I don't think it's normal, and I think for a lot of the reasons we've already discussed, it's probably also not healthy to not have drones. Yeah, I don't think the research has even begun to scratch the surface. And when I say the research, I'm talking about, I don't think the academic institutions are missing out on a whole part of the hive and understanding the whole picture of the hive in this drone thing. You know, the other thing to me is the drones are so essential to the colony. Not even so much as just being in the colony, but remember, every queen is mated to like between 12 and 19 drones. So the queen contains her own DNA, and every worker gets a copy, you know, half of her DNA. But every worker also gets the DNA from a single drone. So something like 90% of the diversity, the genetic diversity in that hive is from all those drone fathers, because they're all half-sisters. They have the same mother, they all have different fathers, or they have subclasses of different fathers. And so, you know, when we talk about breeding and we talk about the queens and the importance of picking good queens, when we pick a queen based on the performance of the colony, the queen is only 10% of the overall genetic diversity of the colony. So we need to think about the health of our drones in regard to the overall colony health in the next generation. There is a lot of good research on treatments impairing the sperm in the drone, or impairing the ability of the drone to fertilize a queen in that next generation too. So I think a lot of the problems we're having in the general commercial industry with queen failure isn't because the queens are bad at all. I think it's because they're mated to drones that have been doped with miticides and are largely infertile. So it's something to keep in kind of in picture. The whole picture includes the drones and has to.
And if you want some research on that, actually there's one on thermal regulation where the drones actually contribute to heating the brood nest. There's another one that actually contributes to the morale of the colony, and they tend to be productive. But you can also probably find about 5 of them out there that say they'll be less productive if they have smaller drones. But for every study, there's one opposite study.
I tell people that drones are more than just semi-autonomous testicles.
So I have kind of 2 follow-up questions to that. First of all, when I did, I had a decent day that was above 50 about a month ago, and checked on my hives, and I found some drones in one of my hives. And I was just like,
But that's good, that's good.
Great.
well, but they were from last year. I
But
think.
that's good.
Oh, is it? Okay.
That's
so
normal.
I was,
The bees,
I've never seen that before, so I was a little afraid.
Strong, good hives in nature always carry a few drones the whole winter over. So if a calamity sets in and they have to requeen themselves in an emergency or do a thalidicy backup with the workers taken home, they got someone to mate with and do it with.
Okay, well, that's great. I did not know that, and I was a little taken aback.
No,
so-
that's great.
Okay, good.
Well, and the people say that the drones all get kicked out in the fall.
Right.
But
That's quite true.
it's not quite true, but I have also noticed that as I've transitioned from the commercial package bees that were available to me to everything I have now being swarms and most of it survivors from probably the feral population, I have noticed that they keep the drones in the hive longer. And even when they kick out a lot of the drones, they keep a few of those drones now, and I never saw that before. So I think there's differences in the feral bees, the bees from nature that we should be working with in regard to how they manage drones in our regions versus the package bees that we're getting. So that is something that I would say is a good thing, because you might not see that in other colonies from other stock.
Yeah, but they're trying to breed that out so they can sell more
Packages, yeah.
more packages.
So then my follow-up question to this is kind of hard to answer, but so what if, okay, we're all treatment-free, like I'm dedicated to that, but I'm also dedicated, to beekeeping and to having bees, and what if you find your hive is just, a varroa disaster, and they're sick and they're, having problems? I mean, you just let it die. Is that
Well, you size it down.
Well,
Normally, it's the cell size, because without the juvenile hormone tether, trigger, whatever you want to call it, or having enough of it in the royal jelly to get the reproduction rate going more, you don't have a problem in any worker brooding. It's like when we looked at the comb here. They're still downsizing, being escaped domestics trying to get back in line with nature, and they need another queen beyond here with smaller workers coming out, because they can only go down a 0.1 or a 0.2 millimeter each time, which today, after 4, 6, 8 upsizings in some areas, is over 100 years to get home. So by having smaller comb and putting all the smaller comb and getting rid of the bigger, so you keep them going smaller, rather than letting them have the big stuff to work on, you can get them home, and then once you got them in their uniform, you got stuff to feed the other hives to start expanding, and then you can really build an outfit up.
So there's another perspective that I like to give to people thinking about this too. If you had 100 hives and you lost 5% or 10% per year of the weakest hives, and even with treatment-free, good colonies, small cell comb, it's not realistic to expect 100% of them to survive every year, right?
Yeah.
There are things that happen even under a good population system where, you know, every time you raise a new queen, you kind of get this new mix of genetics, and maybe it's got it and maybe it doesn't, but under good conditions, most of them will have it and a few of them won't. So if you have one hive and it collapses and dies, you can't think that you're doing anything wrong. You should think, well, that's that. I got that one unlucky hive out of 10 that was destined to go down, because that's how nature works.
But then you open the hive up and observe and look at the combs and the frames, and you look by observation too, you know,
Yeah.
to see if you can see anything.
I mean, I'm not trying to monopolize this, but 2 follow-up things. I think you're right. It's just hard when you only have, you don't have 100 hives. You only have, that's very hard for people that are just starting, you know, and we talked about this, that's the difficulty. And as far as getting them on small cell, yeah, I mean, that we gotta work with what we have. And
Well, that's what you're doing.
Time is.
That's what you're doing?
I feel like I'm in a race, you know, because it's a race against how quickly can they get back to.
Well, they're trying, and you can see it from the way it's drawn, they're trying, but in the meantime, to help them out, once they draw, you don't keep that old comb if it's bigger than what is the old books for the old true pharaohs. You keep the smallest, you always keep the smallest in the center where the queen lays first, but you have to phase out the bigger stuff so they can draw more smaller and just keep going. And because the road up to bigger is also the road backwards to going smaller.
And the nice management trick for that is when the colony's strong enough and you can insert a single comb, a single frame into the center of that brood nest where the smallest cells are, they will draw out smaller cells.
Right.
But if you're constantly adding at the edge of the brood nest where they're making honey, they will draw out bigger cells. So we have to utilize that difference in the way the bees manage the comb to get them to draw smaller in the middle, and then move those bigger brood combs to the edge for honey storage, and then eventually you can, you know, with a top bar, you have the perfect system, because when you do harvest, you want to harvest the ones that have the largest cells, and so you're going to be continuously moving to a better situation.
Yeah, but you're observing nature, you're seeing what she's doing like you are, but then you're working with her for what you need done to get it done.
I think that's a super important.
So he's saying real
issue
important stuff here.
That people, that I feel like I learned that by keeping bees, not necessarily by what people tell you. And I think that's really, really important. Like,
Learn to talk.
exclamation mark on that.
You just learn to talk with your bees and observe them. And then they say, what do you mean you talk with your bees? Well, go out and listen.
All right, we had a question at the back, yes?
So I'm going to switch topics to, I guess, like pesticide poisoning. I have this one client who has 3 hives of mine, and every year, often around the same time, but not always, her bees basically, they start shaking, having seizures, they're on their back with their tongue out and their legs moving like this on the landing pad. They're flying around disoriented, crawling around on the ground. She's had her hives die every year for the last 3 years, all 3 of them usually. This year she had 1 make it through the winter. And whenever I do a hive autopsy, I always try to do it as soon as like the problem's happening or as soon as bees die. And I oftentimes send samples to the USDA for, the USDA lab. And it always comes out negative. So I think on the second year, I think at the very most, one of the tests said we had like 2 million spores of nosema per bee, which is like nothing. I think it's like 15 million and now this one hive has nosema. So my client finally paid $350 to get a pesticide test done, which the government does not do.
Yeah.
Huge, very obvious why the USDA doesn't offer that. But anyway, she paid for it to get it done, and we probably sent the bees in. They probably were tested 5 or 7 days after they died and came out negative for pesticide poisoning.
Okay.
And so I just assumed like whatever they got poisoned with has like a really quick half-life.
What time of year is this happening? You said it's about the same
In
time.
the fall, fall, yeah, like August, September, October. I keep on thinking that it's like a park nearby spraying something, but after the pesticide test came out negative, we've just been kind of like hopeless.
Where'd you get a test?
She found, I think there's like 2 agencies that do it online, and she picked one of the 2. She did the research because she was the one paying for it, so I don't know.
You gotta send it, Germany's where you gotta send
What is it?
it. Germany.
Oh, so nowhere in the US.
What does it cost to do
There
that?
probably is, but I mean, Germany, they've been doing the feed product contamination thing for a long time, and good at it. You can feel confident in their results. Intertech is the name of it.
The only other,
What am I supposed to think if the bees are basically acting like they have a neurological disorder?
It sounds like an organophosphate where the nerves jump in the dead.
Yeah.
it sounds like
Could be
toxicity.
anything but pesticide poisoning?
Well, that's the one thing to consider is depending on what's planted nearby. There are plants known to be toxic.
Oh, like
Buckeye and the jasmine down in the
She's in
south,
like
but
urban-ish neighborhoods, so there's not 7 days.
Yeah, but urban people, do they have lawns?
Yeah, there's lawns around.
Because the urban people that have the nice lawns with the green light and the other stuff.
Yeah, it could be any of those.
and then knowing what's blooming that time of year, what your bees might be foraging on, or they might be collecting, if there's a dearth, they could be collecting something that is causing them toxicity too. And it could be a real challenge to figure out what it is. And of course, when they do the toxicity testing, they're looking for certain classes of chemicals, but oftentimes those tests come out inconclusive if they're not looking for the right thing.
They have to be like,
It's usually a panel and they test for residues of several hundred known compounds, and unless they detect something using HPLC or gas chromatography or something that isn't in their standards or isn't something that they normally recognize, it could be missed. So if I were looking at the test results, I'd want to look at them and say, well, how comprehensive is this relative to the kinds of chemicals that might be used in an urban area, and what could have
Sounds
been
like
missed.
organophosphates.
Yeah. Okay, another question?
People running out of gas.
I guess they're getting hungry.
In southern Arizona, most do bees cluster. A lot of days there's not that many days that the daytime high is below 50 degrees, so they're not really in a tight cluster all winter. They're going to fly a lot, aren't they? Which means they're going to.
Well, let's put it this way. Last week, the morning temperature on King's Ranch and a lot of the ranches where I'm at was down to 25 degrees.
I'm talking about the high.
The high,
No, if the high gets up to 50, they're going to do some flying that day.
they'll fly in the low 40s.
So low 40s.
I mean, strong colonies will fly in the low 40s with smaller bees because they can flex their muscles, they're more compact.
So they're going to need more honey to get through the winter, right? Because they're more. Which way does it go? Cluster uses more honey, or bees that are active use more honey to get?
Bees that are active use more, and bees being cold-blooded that hibernate, no, they don't eat as much.
Okay.
But smaller bees,
So when you're doing your 3 boxes for brood, and you're pyramiding it in, and those other ones have more honey, and then if you pull everything else off, is that going to be enough for a good strong batch to get through the winter? What's in there on the sides? Or do you
well,
need
if I
to-
have 3 honey, which is 6 frames in each box, and I'm working with deeps, I've got about a good 60 pounds plus in the, that's like 120 pounds there, sitting there between that and pollen.
Is that adequate for the winter?
Well, let's put it this way, that's more than some people use even up in Canada more, where they're only using 40 or 50 pounds or 60 if they're lucky.
Yeah, but if they're clustered and that's what I'm trying to figure out for Arizona. You know, I do all my research on the internet and I'm trying
Yeah.
to figure out south down here versus up.
Well, I've always left them 3 deeps, even when I lived up north. And I do the same down here because what you say for cold isn't really that cold, but in the hot of the summer that you don't have up north, you've got to have that same amount of honey as you would in the winter to keep them from overheating.
Okay.
So it's a year-round thing. And in some places in Arizona, in the south here, it can, well, 117, 112 to be out working bees, even 120, 121 I've seen. I mean, it's nothing new. But then when you're working every half hour, you're taking a cup of ice water and putting it down the back of your neck so you can keep working, so you don't overheat yourself for heat strokes and things. Which is the old trick for that. If you get hot and you feel like you're, you better take a cup of ice water, put it down your back, put it down your front, and all of a sudden you're good to go again.
It'll wake you up for sure.
Question for Joe. Suppliers of small bees?
I would say that's a good question for you. You've probably got the most comprehensive list of people. I don't know if you've been refreshing it, but
Remind me where you live?
Verde Valley, Arizona.
Here. Suppliers of small bees. There's not many. There's Wolf Creek. There's
Georgia.
yeah, Fat Bee Man in Georgia who will ship. But
I
he's not
stopped
totally
doing it.
treatment free.
Because I used to do minimum of 10, 20,000 queens a year, and I used to do just with nukes and packages 500, 600, and I stopped doing it with the damn Tucson Bee Lab.
Maybe you could.
You stopped doing it.
Just Karen, didn't you have a list of?
Yeah, and he asked me, and I was just actually taking some up, and one of the ones, this is on from the listserv that got mentioned, but they got the name from you, Solomon. Frost and Son in Arkansas, they were on.
Yes,
the
Frost. Yes, you can't really find him on the internet. You'll have to call him. He's old fashioned.
Yeah.
But I've heard from a bunch of people that he's got good
They
small
stopped
scale
doing
treatment
it in
free
Arizona
bees.
because they declared Arizona
Last
Africanized.
name's
So
Frost.
if you
I don't know
have
his first
them,
name.
you cannot.
You can find it.
laboratory
I have a
or
page on my
any
website at
Africanized
parkerbees.com/remap.html, and there's a map of all of the
to buy
treatment-free
anything from any
beekeeping
state of
suppliers.
Arizona.
All
So they
stuff
put the whole
that I'm
industry.
aware of, and you can send me a message and add to those if you come across any other ones.
That's great.
you know,
Bee Weaver in Texas, were you saying that? Bee Weaver in Texas?
Bee Weaver's treatment free, but not small
they're
cell.
not small cell.
Oh,
Well, there's 2 weavers. There's
B and
Bee
R.
Weaver.
one weaver's pretty good. The other one's a sellout.
Yes, agreed.
You know, my hope is that eventually there's a big enough network of small cell beekeepers that when you need small cell treatment-free bees, we'll know 20 other people from your area in Arizona, and we'll ask if any of them have splits they're going to make, or going to have extra splits or could make up nukes. I mean, we really, as a community, we need to start thinking about serving each other rather than always looking for a supplier somewhere.
Right.
Also, I don't recommend John. You
I don't
can send
either.
me-
I don't either because his bees aren't really treatment free, and basically he just tries to. I applaud the idea of trying to make things less toxic, which he does, but he's not treatment free and doesn't intend to be. Where he helped me out was that I was struggling with getting bees that were fully regressed and would stay that way. And the way that I was able to do that is by buying a few nukes from him that had small cell comb in them. And so when I introduced those into my system, his bees died, but I had the comb. And once I had that comb that the queens could lay in and have good small cell bees, from then on I had no problem getting small cell drawn correctly.
And you know, he renders all his wax every year. I've learned a lot from him. I've learned a lot from his videos, and I live not that far from him.
goes and shakes bees down in South Georgia. I'm sorry that your bees died that you got from him, but I think his genetics are fairly sound. But he dopes them up with so much sugar. I mean, he sells 100-pound barrels of sugar, and he's pushing that to people. So I can't, in my good conscience, recommend him.
He's basically a modern small cell commercial beekeeper. The only difference is the substances that he's using.
And he condones, he makes a big deal out of, oh, come and see my bee yard. You don't need a veil, and you can wear shorts, because he likes pretty girls that wear shorts, you know? I don't think that's very sound practice to condone not wearing a veil, no matter what, you know?
His bees are fairly gentle, and that's one of his selling points.
And he feeds them all the time, so there's never a dearth for them to get angry. They're always happy.
But when I bring them home, they can't survive winter.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a big, beautiful 3-deep hive with 2.5 deeps of honey and a nice big cluster, and the first freeze comes along, and they just cease to be.
But is he treatment free, or is he just
He uses formic acid.
He uses organic acids, food grade mineral oil,
And
various
essential
vapors
oils.
of what it's just.
But he says he's treatment free.
Yeah.
Because he does produce shape of air and
He doesn't use
Second,
harsh
guys.
chemicals.
Sorry.
Are you pointing to me?
Yeah.
I was gonna ask if we could pass around a sheet of paper for people to put their contact information on, maybe just an email or whatever they care to offer to share with the group. And those who don't want to, can you just pass it on?
Actually, we would like that anyway, because we'd like to be able to send each of you emails as we're going forward, so that you can keep up with what we're doing.
I don't actually have a piece of paper.
Well, no, I will, give me 2 minutes, I'll run.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, some people are leaving and.
Is Karen right?
So solid.
Yes.
He's not treatment
He's not. You're not. If you buy anything from him, it's not going to be super contaminated like it would be from a commercial beekeeper.
free. Right.
He brags about. Well, the thing I never understood is he wouldn't use plastic comb or plastic frames because they're plastic, but he'll brag about drinking food grade mineral oil from a plastic bottle. I don't know. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But for me, in my treatment-free work, it's about being totally treatment-free and having bees that are totally able to survive on their own
Right.
always. So if something happens like
His definition does not meet your definition.
well, that's
I'm
with you, in my definition.
He has
If
a double-edged
something happens
sword
to him-
that you gotta watch both sides.
if something happens to the beekeeper and the bees die, that's not treatment-free beekeeping.
Yeah.
I'm looking for bees that survive on their own, and those aren't it.
I mean, the only reason why I asked is because he was only
That's 15 minutes fast, so it's 10 till.
treatment-free wax
Lunch is at 12.
foundation. And so I just need premium for foundation.
Well,
Just tell me this
and
is
when he
what
says-
it makes.
When he says it's treatment-free wax, it's going to be free of coumaphos, it's going to be free of epistan, it's going to be free of whatever else, to the extent that he isn't using those mite treatments.
Yeah.
But if he's using any thymol, there's going to be thymol residue in it. If he's using any essential oils, there's going to be essential oil
Are
residue
you still
in it.
talking about Dawn?
Talking about the wax, yeah. And
Sorry?
You don't use any of that stuff because what he's using, where he's misting in and spraying to do it, that's what goes in the breathing passages of the bees and the lungs and puts them down.
there are grades of bad, better, good,
There's no
best, you know, and really what we are all striving for, and I think the reason we're all here is because we're striving for the best.
Absolutely.
You know, we want healthy bees that can resist varroa and other problems without treatment. We do it on small cell to give them every advantage we can. We give them the best food we can to give them the best optimal health to fight off these problems. But then the other part of it is there are a lot of bees that just can't survive without that support. And we need to let those bees die off and work with our local feral populations to the best of our ability
That's how evolution goes forward. The weak die and the strong goes on. That can go on. It's always been that way. But if you can't live healthy and go on,
All right, folks, we've got 10 minutes before lunch. Any other questions you want to?
And it's not just that the weak die, it's that the weak, as what we see as weak are actually bees that have been adapted over the past 30 years to require treatments to survive. They're well adapted for that environment. But again, if something happens to the beekeeper and they can't be treated anymore, they die. What we're trying to get is bees that are adapted for the actual environment, where we aren't necessarily part of the system.
you mean you pass it on to someone else that works different? And
Yeah, that's gonna happen eventually.
No, he means looking at your eyes for 2 years.
wow.
Bruce?
Yeah, well, I think this whole problem with treating bees is just another opiate addiction thing.
Really?
You're fine on opiates.
Really?
You know, you
You
can
can
work
function,
day to day. You don't know if people are on opiates. They seem rational, everything else. Take them off the opiates, you crash and burn and maybe even die
Really?
before you get better. That's what happened with the bees. You take them off the dope, as Dee says, and they go through withdrawals, and it takes a while to regain themselves back again.
What kind of withdrawals do they have?
Usually death.
Usually dead.
I mean, sugar is the same way. I mean, general bees, I mean, you know, like kids that are real active and kind of crazy and stuff, and if you alter their diet and take them off of some of the white bread, sugars, carbohydrate stuff, and give them some other stuff that's fuller nutrition, can usually restore them down into more of a normal behavior pattern.
Really? What's so different?
I don't know.
Just kind of sarcasm you.
Yeah.
Karen, did you have a
Did you have a
question?
question? Okay. Do we have another question in the back over here before we wrap it up? Yeah, go ahead.
It's not that quick, so it would be considered, or I could just talk to people at lunch if people want to talk about it. I was curious if anybody has experience doing backward Langstroth, and I know a lot of you, it sounds like you do Langstroth, but without a queen excluder, and you let the brood chamber go into the higher parts of the hive, and then proceed.
That's the bees themselves. Bees work up and down the ladder in a hive. And depending on the year and the type, the temperatures of the year, the humidity of the year, bees either work down or they work up. And it's just you knowing what you're looking at, especially if you go to another area that's not yours, so you can put everything into timing so you know what you gotta do. And that's just by observation and learning.
So it seems like an area like mine that's a lot cooler and more temperate, since I'm on the coast. I could get away with doing my Langstroths to backwards and managing them like a warray and having the brood chamber on top and letting it go down if it gets too hot.
There's only one problem.
So by backwards, and just so that everybody's on the same page, because I'm
Yeah.
trying to understand, are
They're
you
different.
speaking about adding new boxes underneath? So it's
Adhering instead of super.
yeah, some deering, okay.
That's the problem with the ware guy that's in jail, if I remember, well, better not say that.
Well, and it's not unnatural, because the bee's still working down in the column
Yeah.
you give them. You're just anticipating that as they fill up above with honey and they're moving down, that they're going to draw new comb in the box underneath. And then as they work back up, you've got empty comb in the box underneath. And eventually, when you're ready to harvest, you can take a box from the top, add another box in the bottom when they're growing, and it's a technique. But
The brood nest will not be on the top.
the brood nest won't be on top.
It'll always be near the bottom.
Yeah.
They always store honey over the brood nest, and
Yeah.
that always pushes it down. So.
Really? Because I always thought they'd prefer to keep their brood warm and their honey cooler.
No,
No.
it's the opposite.
I've been working waring for 5 years, and the brood is always, sometimes, like Joe said, the bottom box will be empty comb, and they'll use that The queen uses it a lot, like if they're starting to crowd her and say, okay, we're gonna shove you out of here, you're gonna swarm. If there's an empty box on the bottom, she'll use that as a, girls club. But, so the bottom box may be fairly empty, and they'll stay usually in like 2, 3, and 4. And then up above that'll be honey. Yeah.
For the installation.
The exception to that I see is in the winter, usually about the 1st of January, the first warm spell we have midwinter, the bees will frequently move up to the top of the box. It's like they mass migrate up. Or sometimes they'll just eat the honey in the middle 2 or 3 combs, leaving 3 or 4 combs of honey on the sides. And so then you see the bees on the top, and they haven't eaten all the honey on their way up. They got there and probably ate their way up through 2 or 3 combs. But they still have lots along the sides, and then being at the top, I think, does help them with heat regulation, because now they're in the top of that cavity, and especially for smaller colonies. But I see it with the big ones too.
Yeah, but that's how we learn to copy construction for building homes. So we've got good stuff to live in where we're warm and secure too.
Let me give you the dirt simple answer.
Yeah.
Whatever works real good, do
Uh-huh.
that.
Do that.
I just got so I've had top bars for the last like 7 years, and I just got my first lens drop last year, and I'm just a little bit confused on how I want to manage it. And the bees that came with it didn't make it through the winter, so I'm starting fresh this year.
Try managing it less and see what direction they want to go in. And then develop your management from that. Because if you go into it with an idea of what you're going to do, it may not be compatible with what they're trying to do. And so you may need some time to just observe.
So if I see that the brood chamber is moving upwards, do I want to put a super on top, or do I want to put a super on the bottom?
Top.
Top.
Well, and you're also getting combs. You're also getting combs drawn out. And you can help them along that process by moving a couple frames of brood up and a couple frames of honey. And so you expand the brood nest, and then they'll naturally fill the combs out this way. Once you reach a point where you've got 3 or 4 boxes, then you can kind of watch them and see what they're doing, and maybe play the game differently. But what you're going to find is if you've got a box full of honey on the top, and then brood and brood and brood, and you want to put a box on the bottom, that's a heck of a lot more lifting and manipulation than you may want to do in the end.
For sure, yeah, that's where I'm.
Yeah.
Okay, this is why when you make up splits, normally you work with full boxes, but you put a box below with comb for doing. You have your box that you're putting on, that's the new bees you're putting on, and then you got another box on top, and then they've got the option, they can work up or down or both directions at the same time. And that was the old way for starting hives. So if you've got a yard with 4 and 5 deeps, if you bring everything down to 3s or bring from 5s down to 4s, if you start with 3s, with the second one, with one below, one above, if it's drawn out, normally you'll have that thing full before the year's over, and by fall, a lot of times, you can get some surplus in a 4th box. Because they don't have to draw it, they can work faster. But it's not something you see taught with all these little...
Building up a new colony, getting them to draw a new comb is much different management than when you have lots of comb to work with. So
to draw a comb, you have to have heat. You have to have a minimum of, let's see, if you have in the 70s, they'll start if you have a strong hive, because the bees can put off 10, 12, 13 degrees of heat just with the cluster, with the heat coming up. So at heat rising in the spring, they'll work up because the heat is rising. The 70s goes into the 80s where they can draw it, in the mid 80s to the 90s and everything, so they're working up. But then as it gets hotter, they stop at a point, because if they can't keep it cool enough, once it's over 105, 106, then they have to cool the hive down to be able to work with brood and comb building and stuff. So things work in 2 different directions. So there's the up and the down depending on the time of year. And this is why in your Mediterranean areas, between the 30th parallel and a little bit above, you have your bands around the earth where you've got your spring cycle, your fall cycle, your lull cycles, and the bees just go up and down. If you're up north more, they're down more. Say, if you're down south where it's hot, closer to the equator on 0, it's hot, hot, hot. It's a different thing because it's too hot, see what I'm saying? Versus where they're up and then they got to go up following heat and stuff. But that's just, you know, what region that you live in. But most of us live it similar to the Mediterranean, and all the plants and animals and everything work the same in rings around the earth. And it's time for lunch.